frequency transmission.
Un ermitaño
Pour être admissible,
then in their own
Till the rain comes, there is no
primer grado.
My name is Philip Jacobs, and I'm 47 years old. Since about the age of 11 or 12, I've been absolutely fascinated with Egypt and the ancients and the mummies and the pyramids, and I always wished that I could go one day. And about 3 decades later, it finally happened. On Friday, the 13th of March, 2020, I embarked on an 8-day working holiday to Egypt. We landed around 6 a.m. on the Saturday. We stopped by for some breakfast at a local street cafe, and then we made our way to Saqqara. The Step Pyramid of Djoser is regarded as the oldest pyramid in Egypt. So that was pretty special. Our next stop was the Serapeum. Now, for me, this was one of the highlights. There's a wall there, 3 sides, and on the open side, there are some steps going down to a doorway. So it doesn't quite prepare you for when you walk in. It opens up into this massive tunnel complex. The Serapeum was built to house the tombs and the sarcophagi of the Apis bulls. These sarcophagi are absolutely astonishing, and they weigh around 62 tons. And onto the bent pyramid built by the pharaoh Snefru. They kind of got halfway and they realized it was going to be too high, so they lowered the angle. So it's always been known as the bent pyramid. Of course, we jumped at the opportunity to go inside, which turned out to be somewhat of a workout. You start a descent of about 80 meters. Now, this is not just walking or steps, it's actually quite a tricky thing because it's just too low to walk, and of course coming up was really the hard part. Our last visit for the day was Memphis. Massive 10-meter statue of Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great. And so from there we made our way to CAIRO airport to take the night flight down to LUXOR. On Sunday we woke up to the most beautiful sight of LUXOR. Crisp, clear sunshine, beautiful blue skies. From our hotel you could look across the Nile and you could see LUXOR Temple. It was going to be a much more relaxed day. So we got onto the river taxi and made our way across the river. We stopped by the LUXOR Museum and Mummification Museum. It was quite an interesting one. Then we moved on to LUXOR Temple. It was late afternoon as the sun was setting. So it was just an absolutely beautiful sight. Massive stone columns, carvings and the hieroglyphs. Breathtaking. And then over the next 2 or 3 days, we visited most of the sites. In the Valley of the Queens, the big star of the show for us was the tomb of Queen Nefertari. Apart from just its sheer size, the decorations, paintings and the wall carvings, extremely vibrant. We also spent the best part of the day in the Valley of the Kings. And of course, the main attraction there is the tomb of King Tutankhamun. Now, just to the west of the Valley of the Kings is the Valley of the Monkeys, also known as just the Western Valley. And of course, it contains the tomb of Ai, who was an advisor to Tutankhamun. And it is believed that he may have swindled Tutankhamun after his death. Tut was actually not buried in the tomb that was destined for him, and Ai was buried there instead. Then there was Deir al-Medina. which is the village of the tomb builders. It's also quite a large complex. You have the actual village, and then you have some tombs set in the hillside, a Ptolemaic temple built around 300 BC, the Greek writing on the outside sort of carved into the wall, ancient Greek graffiti. Also paid a visit to Medinet Habu, mortuary temple to Ramesses III. On Wednesday, the 18th of March, we headed across the Nile to Karnak Temple. Now, Karnak Temple is actually a misnomer because it's not just a temple, it is a temple complex. As over the years, pharaohs added to it, it grew into the largest religious complex in the world. As you walk in and you walk down, the further you go back in time. And so after quite a few hours exploring Karnak, we headed back across the Nile to the hotel for lunch. And everyone was in good spirits, looking forward to a really good lunch. And I remember we sat down for lunch and everyone placed their order. And one of the guys in our group said, listen everybody, I've just received an email. And as he was reading it on his phone, I saw it on my phone as well. The bad news was that our flight on the Saturday, coming back to South Africa, had been cancelled. They didn't say postponed, they didn't say reschedule or moved, it just said cancelled. And as from the Friday, all tourist attractions will be closed. So effectively, I think our worst fears were realized. We weren't going home on Saturday and we're not going to be having lunch with our families on Sunday. So we realized that we probably didn't have too much time to get through all the items on our itinerary. Hatshepsut's temple was actually scheduled for that afternoon, and so we headed out. However, halfway there, things took a turn for the worst. One of the members in our group became ill. We had to stop and turn back. So for the rest of that afternoon and that evening, everyone just sort of kept to themselves and just, I think, try and digest what's transpired. So early on the Thursday morning, we headed out on what would be our last excursion. So the first stop was Hatshepsut's temple, which in itself is pretty magnificent. But the whole area, there are many tombs, some carvings here and there. There's a photo somewhere. I did ask someone to hold their finger up to the carvings just to get an idea of the scale. Fine craftsmanship. Our next stop, the Ramesseum, a mortuary temple to Ramesses II. Now, apart from the colossal stone pillars, statues, and the carvings, was some of the antique graffiti. The 19th century explorers left their marks. And then we made our final stop, the Colossi of Memnon. These statues of Amenhotep III are 18 meters high, the rock stars of the Theban Acropolis. And so that was the end of our tour. It was kind of sad as we made our way back to the hotel. We said our goodbyes to our driver, and so we faced our next chapter. On Friday, we all sat down and discussed our predicament. There's a photo I took of everyone around the table that morning. And if you look at the faces, you can feel the mood: despair, fear, disappointment. On a more positive side, we negotiated with the owner of the hotel, and she made us a very, very generous offer. And there was a great relief, because the hotel over the last 6 days had become so familiar to us, and being able to stay around was going to make things just a bit more bearable, I think. They also ensured that every room that didn't have a kettle was provided with one, and some cups and saucers and teaspoons. And so we ventured out into the streets to buy our supplies for the next few days: coffee and sugar and toiletries and washing powder. And so we started the waiting game. It was around this time that we also started joining some of the WhatsApp and Facebook groups for South Africans who were stranded all over the world. And only then did we realize how many people were actually stranded all across the world. I think the moment we kind of got over the initial shock of getting stranded, we kind of started settling into some sort of a routine. The feeling of frustration and despair was never really far, but I think everyone kind of settled in and kept busy. We were on our phones all the time. There was table tennis. We hung around the pool, got some sunshine. I started getting into some sort of a fitness routine, some exercises in my room and a little bit of swimming every day. It was towards the end of March that the embassy started putting pressure on us and urging us to move to CAIRO. They kept mentioning an imminent flight. And, when there's a little bit of hope on the horizon, you strongly consider it. Now, this was already 2.5 weeks into a trip that was meant to last only 8 days. And so chronic medications were starting to run low. And all the stresses of what had been going on, I think, was starting to take its toll. And so some health issues were starting to arise. And you don't want to get caught in quarantine in a foreign country. So the decision was made that 3 would stay behind in LUXOR. And the rest of us then packed our bags and we said goodbye to LUXOR. The journey to LUXOR airport felt quite long, actually. And it offered some different views of the country that we haven't seen. We did have some fears regarding getting to the airport, whether we would get through the health checks. We had no idea whether any of us had been in contact with a COVID patient. So it was a bit of a stressful drive. Because the flight was via Sharm el-Sheikh, we had quite a bit of time to just kind of reflect on what had been going on, how things had progressed and escalated. Are we making the right decision moving to CAIRO? Of course, another concern was whether we would get to our hotel before the 7 o'clock curfew. We landed just after 6 and we literally made it to the hotel a few minutes before 7. We were met there by one of the officials from our embassy who sat down with us in the foyer and sort of gave a rough outline of the situation, but there wasn't much information, there wasn't much tangible that we could take from that. Nonetheless, we managed to check in, and after quite a hectic day of traveling, we managed to get a relatively good night's sleep. The hotel accommodation we got was an apartment suite for 6 people. It was clean, it was tidy, and it was even serviced once a day, but it looked like a set from a 1970s sitcom. It had its own charm, I guess you could say. The tricky part was 6 people sharing one bathroom. But of course, having our own kitchen was going to save us so much money, so we didn't have to buy food all the time. And then on Sunday the 5th of April, we paid a visit to our embassy for the first time. It was a pretty miserable day. There was like fog hanging in the air, but it's not fog, it's desert dust. Rather gloomy kind of look. Unfortunately, the meeting was another downer. It was explained to us that because of the unprecedented nature of what was happening, they were in no position to offer any assistance, any financial support. They also made it pretty clear that at that moment there were no specific repatriation plans in place. They were kind of taking it day by day to kind of see how things progress and what opportunities may arise. So we left the embassy rather dejected. In fact, I think rather rejected. And so we tried to kind of settle into some normality, some routine. You get up in the morning, you have a look on the WhatsApp groups and you see what's happening and you realize, okay, well, there's no plans for today. We're not going home today. So how else to make sort of the best of the day? I used to take long walks, pack a water bottle, my backpack. We also had a television that we could watch some movies. They were still English, but they had Arabic subtitles. But we didn't care. It was just some familiar entertainment for us. And so from our balcony, we watched daily life go by. every day there was a guy with a trolley who was doing recycling, and then the guy with the gas cylinders came by, and the refuse people, and in the afternoons you'd see some people jogging. We saw many days and nights and sunsets as time progressed. And around this time, I reached out to some of my colleagues in the industry to engage the media. We wanted to create some awareness. It did feel like we were slightly sort of forgotten. So it was good to do a few radio interviews. I think we were doing everything in our power from our side to contribute to the efforts of getting us repatriated. And then everything kind of changed. Monday, the 20th of April, we received notification from our embassy that on Wednesday, the 22nd, there would be a flight that could take us home. Now, we were happy and we were optimistic, but rather cautiously so. We had had at least about 3 or 4 previous attempts that had failed for various reasons. Nevertheless, we submitted all our documentation. There was quite a bit of admin. We walked up to the embassy, signed our repatriation documents, and of course we were well aware that once we get back to South Africa, we would face 14 days quarantine. So on the Tuesday, we all hit the streets and did some purchases for our imminent quarantine. And so nothing changed. On Wednesday morning, we packed our bags, had a look over the balcony for the last time, went downstairs, got into 2 taxis, and made our way to CAIRO airport. In the meantime, our 3 friends from LUXOR made their way up by road, something which I believe was quite an adventure. Don't tell them, but I think I'm a little bit jealous. It was wonderful how it all sort of came together. Once we saw the sign that said CAIRO Airport, I think our hearts started beating a little faster. So once we got to the airport, that happy moment when we were issued with our tickets, we met up with some of the staff from the embassy that we've been dealing with over the last few weeks, and we finally met our ambassador, Mr. Vusi Mavimbela. He gave a short speech, wished us all well. Thanks were exchanged both ways. And lo and behold, we boarded the plane. Now, this was an Airbus A340. It's a plane kind of designed for about 300 and upwards passengers. We were 26. It was just crazy. It was rows and rows of empty seats. And it was a beautiful moment. As we sat down in our seats, the pilot came onto the PA system and welcomed us to the flight, promised us we're on our way home. And they played us a song. It was Scatterlings of Africa by Johnny Clegg. It was just phenomenal. As we started taxiing and the plane turned, you looked over to the side and you just see rows and rows of parked planes, which I think was probably the same situation worldwide. Because of the pandemic, so many flights were just grounded. Planes were just parked everywhere. And we finally took off just after 6. And I think that was the first moment where we really 100% were convinced, high above the Nile and on your way home. Only then did we feel, all right, this is truly happening. We landed about 1:30 in the morning and went through passport control, got our luggage, and we were driven by police escort to our quarantine facility. So we all checked in, and I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, we all got to our rooms and finally sat down for a minute and just reflect on, gosh, what's just happened? It was a fairly new hotel, and the accommodation was really top-notch. The downside was that we weren't allowed to leave our rooms at all. And so we knew we were facing 2 weeks of proper hotel room lockdown. Frustratingly, we were only tested on about the 5th or 6th day that we were there. I continued my fitness pursuits as much as you can in a hotel room. I walked up and down from the front door to the balcony, back and forth, countless times every day. Some push-ups. There were 2 chairs in the room, and I kind of put them together and did some dips and anything just to kind of keep the mind and the body kind of busy. And then finally on the 5th of May, we were finally set free or released. We jokingly said maybe we got 1 day off for good behavior. And we all kind of went our separate ways to go and try and find, I think, the lives that we left behind 53 days earlier. It was all very surreal. Reconciling what we left behind 53 days ago with what we were seeing and experiencing, that was quite tricky. Oh, for sure. I would go back to Egypt any day. In fact, I can't wait. Personal growth and self-discovery just outweighs the negative by a long, long way. The ancient, the artifacts, the temples, the monuments, the museums, the people, the kindness and love. There are plenty of reasons to go to Egypt. 40 days is not nearly enough.
To date, the COVID-19 pandemic has cost the lives of over 6 million people. This program is dedicated to those we have lost and to celebrate the human endeavor to overcome.